Now, it's not much point going to a conference if you don't change afterwards in who you are and how you think. So a number of changes took place with me after this conference. The first one was that one of my travelling companions, especially when I was coming back, was Sally, who I noticed could read a flight schedule from 100 paces. And it was at that point I decided to have my eyes tested. So these lovely spectacles, which I now have to wear full time, are the result of the conference. So I've had my vision corrected as a result, but I've also had my vision expanded. See what I did there?
Yeah, very clever. It is.
So I did get a conceptual change. I heard some of the speakers there and they really changed my thinking. And of course, it's okay to change your thinking and expand your theoretical framework, but unless it has some practical applications, you're just there, you know, in a nice, cozy situation where you just become a theoretician. But that wasn't the point of the conference. So my talk really is about how it changed my thinking and what tips and advice and what sort of emotional support I got out of the conference. So I attended the plenaries and there were two outstanding speakers for me. One was a man called Philip Ullman, who runs a security company. It's a family firm inherited from his father, highly successful. He decided to turn it into a social enterprise and to cap the amount of money the family could take out. He had an attitude change. He called himself the chief energizer, not the chief executive. And he said that nowadays you must run a company as a covenant, not as a contract. He said a contract is a zero-sum game, whereas a covenant is something that encompasses everything that a company is. And you involve everybody who's connected with that company, and you take their advice, because any decision you make is going to have an impact on your customers, on your workers, and on the environment and the society around you. So he was saying this should be the working model now. And he did cite somebody else called Colin Mayer, Professor Colin Mayer. Has anybody heard of Colin Mayer? Right, I looked him up and he's got a brilliant TED talk about the modern corporation and how it needs to change to encompass all aspects of society, so social capital, natural capital, and all the systems that surround us. The modern corporation, he says, if you go to an MBA course, they tell you that the purpose of a modern corporation is to enhance shareholder value. And the purpose of a modern corporation is to increase profits and make as much money as possible. And he said we need to design the corporation with more purposes than this, that it has a social purpose, an environmental purpose, and it has a purpose where it is nurturing its workers and bringing on the workers. And altogether, he finishes his speech by saying, a moral company is a commercially successful company. So this was a message that I did pick up from this conference, that just because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean you're not going to be successful commercially. Because your customer will be attracted to your company if they think it's a good company that pays the minimum wage, doesn't plough all its profits back to shareholders, but distributes it around and even gives some to charity, so that you have a good feel about the company. So this was a take-home message for me as well. The second person who I found quite inspiring in his talk was someone called Indy Johar, and he's a professor at Sheffield University. He's an architect, but he does think very big, and he was saying that hierarchies are dead, that we ought to use technology to empower us and to increase our capacity, that that we should be networking and using technology like new accounting systems so that the individual is empowered rather than large anonymous corporations. So the message really that I began to take away is that social enterprises are not novelty, peripheral activities. In fact, they are the way forward for the future, and that we're not isolated in what we do. We're, in fact, part of a much larger movement. And so I looked at my own little enterprise, which I thought, you know, something just takes place in the field over in Edgbaston. It's part of the circular economy, and it's the way forward in terms of respecting the environment and having a social purpose. So I got all those from the people there who came and asked me, what do you do? And so I began to explain, well, this is what we do, and we have a way of composting food and using the heat from that to generate energy. And by the time I started to explain it and people asked me leading questions, I began to realise, no, what we're doing is very important. And so it encouraged me to sort of carry on and widen my vision. I attended several workshops. The one that really spoke to me, it was called a masterclass. And it was a young woman whose name is Cressy Watlings, I think her name was. It was Cressy, because her partner is called Elvis, so it's Elvis and Cressy. And she was in London, she's Canadian, she came to London, and she actually discovered a whole lot of abandoned fire hoses that were left by the fire brigade in London, and she turned these into designer handbags. So she called it the backwood invention, that you take something that's being discarded and make it to something useful that people want. It was quite an inspiring story from her, but she was talking again about marketing, and she said, your marketing should be the emotional and energy of the people who are producing these goods, because people will buy into that. And then there was another person at that workshop called Ben Gleisner, who runs a company in New Zealand called Kogo. And what he does is he gets data. So he says, find the social impact of your company and measure it. And for instance, he said there was a bar in wherever, New Zealand, which started paying their workers a living wage. And it increased their profits, because people came because they were attracted to a company that had value and had social value. And this is a message that starts to sell itself in a way. You have to do some marketing, but there is that aspect of it that it's the energy and the emotional commitment of the founders that does generate an attraction for people to come and buy into that particular enterprise. So you often think in terms of traditional marketing and advertising, and often it's there in the energy of the people around who, with their enthusiasm and their vision, can communicate this to people around. So those were some of the takeaways. I did get a lot out of this conference, and it did turn my head around, and I think in a lot of ways that I'm involved in other aspects like the NHS, which again, no reason why it can't be a collection of social enterprises rather than one centrally governed institution where morale is low, people aren't getting enough money out of the system, and where if people are working for themselves but not taking money out of the NHS but putting it back in and making more social institutions connected with health, then we could transform the society we live in. So, yeah, we're part of the mainstream, and it was good to go to the conference.
Thank you.